All right, I'm Jen Nowicki. Have worked for the past 20 years at the Children's Dyslexia Center of Southeastern Ohio, along with my husband. And it's really been a very good time to do this because the research out there concerning dyslexia has just been coming out like mad, and we've enjoyed very much using that research and seeing how much it has helped the students. We have 47 of these children dyslexia centers in the Midwest and the Eastern U.S., and they were started by the Scottish Rite Masons, a philanthropic group. And here's a picture of the yellow ones are where our centers are. Now there are Scottish Rite centers in the southern part, and their speech therapy, and then there's a Scottish Rite dyslexia center over in the western part of the United States too. So the Scottish Rite Masons do good work. They are Masons for our area, cozied up to Mass General Hospital's Dyslexia Center in Boston. And Mass General is the gold standard for hospital care, for research, and for dyslexia centers. So that was a very smart thing for the Scottish Rite to do. Best thing on this slide is that our tutoring is free for families. They should be getting this in school. They're not, but they can come to our center for free. All right, we help children who lack basic reading skills and have a diagnosis of dyslexia. We use the Orton-Gillingham approach, which came from Mass General. And unfortunately, many schools don't really realize there is a research-based teaching approach to help students who lack basic reading skills. All right, why do you need to know about dyslexia if you're going to teach advanced calculus to seniors in high school? Let me make a case here. It affects 10 to 20% of everyone. So you're going to see it in your classrooms at whatever level or whatever subject you're teaching along the way. I can guarantee you that. You need to realize that these kids process material differently. Doesn't mean they're dumb. They are very intelligent, so you need to have an understanding of that. And you're also going to be dealing with parents who are advocating for their kids, and you're in education, and you've got to have a familiarity with some of these terms and some of the research that's going on so that you'll sound like you know what you're doing. All right, the other part of this is you might even see it pop up in your own family. It is genetic. It is not immediate generation prior to, but it could have been in Uncle Harry 2 generations back, and you'll look at your child and say, what's this? I didn't have that kind of trouble when I was in school. What's going on here? And maybe some of the things I say will come back to you. So this is just an overview to increase your understanding of dyslexia. Nothing complicated. Terms that are relative to our field. MSLE, multisensory language education, also called VAKT. Well, those are the senses: visual, auditory, kinesthetic, and tactile. Means we teach material using all of our senses so that weak senses can be offset by strong senses. Excellent way to teach anything in any classroom. Phonological awareness, I'm going to hammer home because that is one of the problems in dyslexia. Our English language is an alphabetic language. Words are made up of letters. Those letters have sounds. Kids have to realize that. Some of them don't. This is the first step that kids go through learning to read in kindergarten and first grade. Now, you probably know decoding means reading, encoding means spelling, but how about the basic reading progression? First, we begin with the skills in order to decode words. And the terminology for this is mapping sounds onto letters. Then we blend these sounds together into words as quickly as possible. That's fluency. And fluency gives us time to think about what we're reading. Comprehension is the name of the game. So what you're going to find out here, and you're going to see pictures of, this first step here with the basic skills is where the glitch comes up for those with dyslexia. In our lessons, we directly teach. We go from easy to difficult concepts. We hear it, see it, say it. We show how they build on each other. We use procedures so that the kids can concentrate on the material and not what they should be doing. They repeat the procedures in each one of the 10-part lesson plans, and we constantly review, and that promotes fluency. Now, those are good pedagogically methods to teach anything. For a definition of dyslexia, there is a longer official definition, but you don't need that at the moment. Think a lack of basic reading skills, making schoolwork difficult and frustrating. That's all you need to know at this point. So, what's the difference between dyslexia and specific learning disability? Aha, you probably know specific learning disability. They're the same thing. They come from different fields. One comes from medicine, one comes from education. Dyslexia comes from the medical field. It's based in medical research. It's been around since the early 2000s, so a long time. Sam Orton, one of the who our procedures are named for, was a medical doctor. Specific learning disability comes from the education field. That term came up in about 1964. It's an umbrella term, and it encompasses different problems associated with schoolwork and that teachers see. So if the specific learning disability is in reading, then SLD is the same thing as dyslexia, and the good news is that the same remediation is going to work for both. So it bears repeating that both dyslexia and SLD in reading are reading problems because the basic level skills haven't been mastered. Unfortunately, two terms, dyslexia and SLD, confuses everybody. So hopefully now you will not suffer from that confusion. The basis for both is thought to be neurobiological or brain things. We have functional MRI. Brain imaging has shown that some prenatal brains develop differently in the areas that are necessary for learning to read. Since the 1990s, we've known this. That's old, that's recent history. And we can see how this happens, and I'm going to show you. And considering the complexity of our brains and how much we don't know about our brains, it isn't too surprising that glitches can pop up. Now, we do know that there are pre-wired speech centers, hearing center, seeing centers in the brain. That's that VAKT, visual, auditory, kinesthetic, tactile, that we use in our teaching. So we know that they're there. You don't need to learn how to speak. You need to be around somebody who's talking. Babies hear right from the get-go. They also see, not very well at the beginning, but it develops. They don't have to learn how to see. But here's the clutch. There's no pre-wired reading center, since reading and writing is a human invention and has only been around for 500 plus years. And this is not time enough to permanently change our brain connections. They will probably be permanently changed, but certainly not in your lifetime. So every time someone learns to read, older, unused brain neurons are cobbled together to make the new reading circuit. I love that, cobbled together. And thinking about the complexity of our brains, it's not surprising at all that there could be glitches in some of the new connections. The most exciting research in my mind within the past 30 years concerns brain plasticity. This is relevant to both reading and also your future lives. Marian Diamond is the mother of plasticity, and in the mid-80s, that's recent history, she studied rats' brains, and she saw that when she enriched their environment, their brain structure would change. So she gave them a little bit more food. She gave them a little more time on that little running wheel, took them off, imaged their brain, and they saw that those brains were different than the typical rat brain. Now, in the 80s, human brains were thought to be fixed at birth, and reconfiguring their neurons was thought to be impossible. I learned that sitting in Montgomery Hall in the 80s. Your brain was fixed at birth. Well, Marian Diamond went a step further, and she used her brain imaging to study both babies and older adults. Actually, she used her bridge club. Her work showed that the brain is not fixed at birth, but the connections can be changed. Since we cobble together or change connections to allow us to read in the first place, we can recobble, again change the circuits when it's needed. And so we call this second change remediation. That's what we do at the center in Cambridge. Also, before the 1980s, and I learned it over in Montgomery Hall, it was thought that after age 30, your brain starts to lose connections and can't form any new ones, which means you can't learn anything much after age 30. But Marian Diamond's research shows that by making modifications, we can keep forming new connections for our entire life. We might have to do it more slowly. We might have to rely on another sense than the one we're used to using, but it is entirely possible. And of course, that's where use it or lose it comes into play. So, recap. There's no pre-wired reading center in the brain. Therefore, plasticity kicks in and allows us to read in the first place. Then plasticity allows recobbling for remediation of problems and also allows us to continue learning throughout our lifetime. That's good news. Brain wiring is passed through the generations, i.e. it is genetic. So SLD and dyslexia also are genetic and may not come from your immediate past generation, you or your spouse, but could come from a distant relative. We typically just blame it on the spouse when we go through, or on Uncle Harry that was way back. Common myths about dyslexia that I know you've heard. People with dyslexia see things backwards, upside down, or inside out. BDs, common reversals when kids are learning to read. This is not true. It is not a visual problem as was commonly thought of prior to our functional imaging research. Visual problem has totally been debunked by research. Secondly, you'll hear older teachers possibly, well, I didn't have to learn to read. The kids can just learn to read like they learn to speak. Again, there's no speech. There is a pre-wired speech center, but there is no pre-wired reading center. So even though it looks like it happens miraculously, the kids are putting together the pieces of learning to read so that those neurons can cobble together. You might also hear about colored overlays. Parents bring them, this cycles through about every 6 years, and parents bring them in, and they've paid up to $20 for a piece of colored plastic to put over the sheet, and they will guarantee that it's going to help Johnny learn how to read. There is no research. It's been around since the 80s. Psychologists started this up, never told what the research behind it was because there isn't any. So don't be fooled by that. Don't be fooled into thinking that a quick fix can be used to help a child who struggles to read. Remediation, you're changing brain connections, typically takes time, proper methods, and patience. Now, you might wonder about reading to children, your children. Reading to your children is important. They gain a lot from that. It may not avoid them having dyslexia if dyslexia is in their genes, but please read to your kids as much as you can. All right, a last look at the reading progression. Decoding, the basic skills used for breaking down sounds in words, which leads to greater fluency, reading more quickly, giving you time to comprehend, and that comprehension is what it's all about. So this reading progression applies to phonics. It's not whole language. There are two methods of teaching reading. One is whole language, which is not supported by research. Phonics is supported by research. The current view of the underlying problem of dyslexia is a lack of phonological awareness, or not hearing or knowing the sounds of the letters in the words. Well, that's part one of the reading progression. Let me try something here. Can I go back? No. Okay, go ahead. Part one was decoding. In dyslexia, the basic skill of the mapping speech sounds onto letters is a terminology used. Doing this is done in less efficient areas in the brain, and that's going to slow down the reading process from the get-go, and I'm going to show you a picture of this. This slowdown, or reduced fluency, doesn't allow time for comprehension or thinking about what is being read. Gums up the work. Now, you have examples of phonological awareness activities in your handouts. In years past, we've practiced some of these in class here. These are word games. Most kids love to play word games. How about talking Pig Latin? What's the first sound in the word cat? Things like that. You can start that when you're driving in a car with a little kid. You can start it with a kindergartner or a first, second, or third grader. Now, that's when children are taught about the sounds, first, second, pre-K, first, second, and third. The current viewpoint is that phonemic awareness should be taught and practiced longer, up to middle school, because the words get more advanced and more complicated, and the phonological awareness skills get more complicated, and these skills should be practiced longer than first, second, and third grade. Up to middle school would help a lot for our kids. Now, the good news is that early screenings, pre-K, which everybody gets, can show if children aren't hearing the sounds in words. So phonological awareness is all oral. So if your school says there's a little bit of weakness here in the phonological area, start practicing those skills with them. They don't need to know the letter names. All they're doing is hearing the sounds, and it can begin very early and get them on the train to success. All right, other pictures. You're going to see two brain lobes, left brain lobe, right brain lobe. You're going to see two reading routes. You're going to see different areas used when reading leads to a difference in efficiency, i.e. a slowdown. We all have two reading routes, and this is the left hemisphere of the brain. Both of them start in the occipital lobe, which is the visual lobe. We look that's logical. We look at the word, we start reading it. When we're learning to read, we move up to this area right here that is called the word letterbox. That's the word analysis. That's when you map the sounds onto the letters. Okay, a little bit of a slowdown here. Then we move over to Broca's area, frontal lobe, and that's comprehension. Those are higher level thoughts. If it doesn't work out correctly, you go back up to the letterbox. That is what a child is doing when he or she is learning to read. After learning to read and after practicing time and time again, starts in the occipital lobe, zoop through the ventral root to Broca's area. That's why it looks like the child is not mapping the sounds on, but they've gotten that down, they've practiced it, and they're now much more efficient readers. This is the neural signature of dyslexia. This shows that we know what we're talking about here. It's coming from the Shawitzes in the early 2000s with their functional MRIs. You're looking at the left hemisphere of an non-impaired brain and the left hemisphere of a dyslexic brain. All right, again, we start in the occipital lobe, temporal lobe, word form area. We move up to the parieto-temporal word analysis area. And that's where we're doing our mapping the sounds. That's what with the word analysis. From that, we go over to Broca's area in the frontal lobe, articulation and further word analysis. That is a non-impaired reader. Here's a dyslexic reader. Whoa, something's missing. Broca's area is larger, much more articulation, which could be a clue if one of your students is reading out loud. Maybe a little red flag goes up there that something's going on. No word analysis, no word form. It's happening in the right hemisphere. On the other side, it's going to be slower. That hemisphere is less efficient for learning to read. It finally gets over here to Broca's area, but it's going to take a little bit more time, and you're going to lose that time for comprehension. So this is definite difference in the two brains between a non-impaired reader, which is probably 80% of all the readers, and a dyslexic or SLD in reading reader, which is probably 10 to 20% of the readers. So this, let's go over the terms here. Begins in the back visual occipitotemporal or word form area. Then moves up to the parieto-temporal or the word analysis area. Both of those right here are in the decoding phase of reading, and this is where things get stuck in dyslexia. Finally, we get to the frontal lobe and Broca's area, and so the higher level articulation comes into play. In the left hemisphere of a dyslexic brain, there's less use on the back portion of the brain because there's less efficient right hemisphere does the basic decoding. Then Broca's area is overactivated as the reader compensates by articulating what he or she is seeing. I'm hoping that this is Blue Man. Yes. Oh, good. I thought maybe I forgot to put that in. Blue Man is going to be facing you. So his left hemisphere is on the right. A normal reader activates a bigger portion of the left hemisphere, and this happens in the top picture. The dyslexic brain is on the bottom and reduces the left hemispheric areas and shows an increase in the right hemispheric areas. All right, here we go, Blue Man. Top, normal reader. Left hemisphere, right here, lots of activity, a lot of connections being made. A few in the right hemisphere. Nothing is just one area. The brain combines all kinds of areas, and so there's activity, and probably important activity for reading, but less of it than in the left hemisphere. Here is a dyslexic brain. Less in the left hemisphere and more in the less efficient right hemisphere, which gums up the works. Now, how do we know when somebody has dyslexia? Unfortunately, we don't have a test. You might say, why don't we do functional MRIs? And that's actually what I asked a neurologist, and he said, well, functional MRIs are cannot be used for diagnosing dyslexia. They can be used for seeing what happens, but it is not a diagnostic test for determining who has dyslexia. So, unfortunately, at this point, we only have a combination of factors. IQ tests. Well, these don't really measure the skills used in beginning reading. We used to use them all the time. For SLD and dyslexia. They don't measure the skills that are used. Now, it could be that they give invaluable information for SLD in the education world, but they do not give valuable information, but they give semi-valuable information. Our population of a whole lot since we've been having our center since 1994, combines them all, the IQ tests. They wanted to see in the beginning if the children had enough IQ to do the procedures and to follow the procedures that we do, so that we now require an IQ test for kids coming in, and the psychologists say, well, we don't ever give that for dyslexia and SLE anymore. It doesn't matter. Yeah, I know, but our research is going to be hung out to dry if we don't have comparative populations. But phonological skills is the best indicator of reading success. Hearing those sounds. I'm going to show you Kilpatrick's phonological awareness. I have not put this in the PowerPoint, but he has a book. I will repeat this at the end. It's called Equipped for Reading Success by David Kilpatrick. And it lays out the phonological skills practice from easy to difficult, gives you words. It makes it so easy and fun for you to use this. And I'll repeat that so that you have it in case you want to use it. Probably use it. Well, you can use it in your classrooms. Why not? Family history. Is there anybody in the family who had trouble reading that you know about? It's genetic. That's a really, really good red flag. That's the one that I ask first when the kids come into our center. Speech problems also seem to tie in to problems in reading, late talking. So when you get your kids, make sure you record the milestones and get the recommended ages of when they should occur, just in case to avoid having to answer that question, just in case. All right, so that's how we've diagnosed dyslexia. Since phonological awareness doesn't involve letters, a preschooler can be screened early just by sounds. This discrepancy formula you may have heard of, the difference between IQ and achievement, doesn't work for a dyslexic to diagnose dyslexia, but it could work for something else in specific learning disability in the field of education. I'm not sure about that. All right, a comprehensive assessment is a synthesis of information, including initial phonological screening. I've beaten that to death. Careful progress monitoring. Okay, that comes in the schools. Student history probably will come from a combination of teacher-parent. Teacher observations, there you're on the board with this one, and parent comments. And so that what I see is a 1, 2, 3, 4 are directly involved with the classroom. This could occur in the elementary grades, but if the child copes well in the elementary grades, but hits a brick wall when things get more difficult and the amount of reading gets greater, even high school teachers might be involved in an evaluation. We have helped college. I used to see it all the time at Muskingum when I worked on the PLUS program. Some of the kids would come up and they would hit a brick wall, and we'd have to have an evaluation. And it takes a really good psychologist to tease out dyslexia at a later age, and actually at an early age too. But it is not out of the question that it might have to happen. We know that dyslexia and SLD occur on a continuum going from mild to severe. Some students will have reading problems, but are able to compensate for them up to maybe a certain point, maybe for their entire lives. Others are going to have severe problems at the get-go and will have much difficulty keeping up with the classroom activities. Reiteration research indicates that the early core deficit in most dyslexics and SLD students is in phonological processing. Screenings can identify problems as early as K through 2 grades. So it's a myth. Oh, hold on a minute. We'll just wait and they'll catch up. If you hear that as a parent, take the necessary steps, do your homework, because dyslexics are not going to catch up. If there is dyslexia there, they're going to continue to have problems, and they should be addressed as soon as possible. I always tell the parents calling in, you are right, get it early and start the remediation. Now, this is research from Brain and Language. It is saying that phonics, the letter-sound relationships, is shown by research to increase activity in the brain areas wired for reading left side of the brain. What we just saw, phonics, is substantiated by research. Whole word and memorizing doesn't work as well. Many of our kids that have dyslexia have memory problems. You'll find out in life, you don't end up with just one problem. Usually Mother Nature piles on a couple more. So you could have ADHD, obsessive compulsive, memory problems. They all kind of cluster. When she finds a weakness, Mother Nature kind of hammers it. So whole word is not going to work as well for correcting a reading problem. And all phonics instruction is not equal. That also comes from the Journal of Brain and Language. Research supports systematic, direct, explicit teaching and going slowly to put the pieces together. Many classrooms cherry pick. They say, oh, we do phonics. Oh, yeah. But basically, they're doing the memorizing, memorize the sight words. And that's, I have grandkids. I'm seeing it happen. Then they cherry pick concepts. Well, that might work for most of the kids. But a systematic plan is known to work for those with dyslexia. And so that as a parent, you might have to make sure that you find someplace where you can get a systematic plan. Teacher resources. Teachers should be showing students that English isn't crazy. Have you heard that? English is very logical and very consistent. This is a secret to learning vocabulary words and to spelling words. But for some reason, a lot of classrooms here, oh, I don't know, just memorize it. I don't know what the meaning is. Well, let's look at the morphology behind our English language. It is fascinating. The kids will love it. Get a good etymology dictionary. Let them do the research, show the relationships between and among words. You're going to be doing the kids in your classroom a big favor. Also, Denise Eads' book, Uncovering the Logic of English, is a very thin book. It would take you probably 2 hours. It's reasonably priced. You will find it fascinating. It gives you it will solve the mysteries that you've wondered about, that when you hear that, oh no, just memorize it, it's crazy. This is worth anybody in the school system taking the time to read Uncovering the Logic of English. Overcoming dyslexia. I hate that overcoming, because you don't really ever lose dyslexia. If you're remediated, many times you'll be able to read enough, you will not be cured. Could be cured if you get into a field and the terminology and the words you see is all consistent. Then it'll appear that you're cured. But we don't ever cure dyslexia. We don't overcome dyslexia. We remediate it, and it seems to be as good as it can get right at this moment. Sally and her husband Bennett Shaywitz are both MDs at Yale, and she is the researcher who did the first functional MRIs back in the 2000s. And her book, Overcoming Dyslexia, regardless of the name, she's just put out a 3rd edition. And it's very parent-friendly and very teacher-friendly. You don't have to have vast knowledge to understand it. So this is recommended. If a parent comes to you, send them towards Overcoming Dyslexia. Dyslexia and Dysgraphia by Ginger Berninger and Beverly Wolf gets a little more complicated. But they talk about work in the classroom environment, oral language teaching. So for elementary school teachers, this could be valuable. And here again, I'll mention, I wonder if I hold this up. Yeah, look at that. Over here. Equipped for Reading Success by David Kilpatrick. It's pretty darn thick. Get it in here, but you don't use all of it at one time. You can, this is something that you can cherry pick and do 10, 15 minutes a day, a couple of times a day, and it'll help.